Imagine walking into a restaurant, expecting a nice meal with your family, only to be treated like you don't belong. That's exactly what happened when the Johnsons, a well-dressed, successful black family, stepped into a high-end restaurant for a quiet dinner. Everything seemed fine, until their waitress, Lisa, took one look at them and made a snap judgment. From the moment they sat down, Lisa's attitude shifted. She barely acknowledged them, rolled her eyes when they placed their order, and kept serving other tables first. When Mr. Johnson politely asked about their food after waiting an unusually long time, Lisa scoffed. "Maybe a place like this isn't for you," she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for them to hear. Mrs. Johnson's face fell, the teenage daughter shifted uncomfortably, and Mr. Johnson clenched his jaw. But instead of causing a scene, he simply smiled and said, "Is that so?" Lisa smirked, crossing her arms. "Yeah, we have a certain standard here." And with that, she waved them toward the door, making it clear they weren't welcome. What she didn't know: the Johnsons weren't just any family, they owned the restaurant. And in just a few moments, Lisa was about to find out the shocking truth that would change everything. Lisa stood with her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently as the Johnsons remained seated. "I don't have all night," she huffed. Other customers glanced over, sensing the tension, but no one spoke up. The family exchanged knowing looks, but Mr. Johnson simply reached for his wallet. "All right," he said calmly. "Let me speak to the owner." Lisa scoffed. "The owner? Please, he's way too busy to deal with." She trailed off, waving a hand at them dismissively. "People like you." Mrs. Johnson placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm, but he was in no rush to leave. Their daughter, Mia, fidgeted in her seat, whispering, "Dad, let's just go." But Mr. Johnson didn't move. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a single call. Lisa narrowed her eyes. "I'm impressed. You can call whoever you want, but it won't change anything," she muttered. Within moments, a sharply dressed man stepped out from the back. His presence commanded the room, and the moment Lisa saw him, her face paled. The restaurant manager, Greg, hurried over with a nervous smile. "Mr. Johnson," Greg said quickly, "is there a problem?" Lisa's mouth dropped open. "Wait, you know him?" Greg shot her a sharp glance. "Know him? He owns this place." Lisa's breath caught. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Lisa felt her stomach twist. Her confident smirk disappeared as she darted her eyes between Greg and Mr. Johnson. Wait, what do you mean he owns this place?" she stammered, her voice suddenly much quieter. Greg sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I mean exactly what I said, Lisa. Mr. Johnson and his family are the majority owners of this restaurant." The room felt eerily silent. Lisa's mind raced as she struggled to process the truth. She had assumed so much about them based on nothing but appearances. Now, standing face to face with the real owner, she felt an unfamiliar wave of panic. Mr. Johnson still hadn't raised his voice, but that made it worse. His calm, steady stare made her shift uncomfortably. "So," he said, tilting his head, "you were saying something about a certain standard here." Lisa opened her mouth, then closed it. The words she had spoken earlier now felt like a trap she had set for herself. She glanced around, searching for some kind of escape, but the other customers were watching, whispering among themselves. Mrs. Johnson finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "We came here to enjoy a meal, just like everyone else. But instead, we were made to feel like we didn't belong." Lisa swallowed hard. I didn't know," she whispered, but even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't a good enough excuse. Lisa's heart pounded as she stood frozen in place. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She had spent the entire evening treating the Johnsons like they were beneath her, never once imagining they were the people signing her paycheck. Mr. Johnson leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "Let me ask you something," he said. "If we weren't the owners, would that make it okay?" Lisa's throat felt dry. She couldn't find the words. Greg cleared his throat, his expression tense. "Lisa, do you have any idea how bad this looks? How many complaints have we had about service lately?" His voice dropped slightly, but he already knew the answer. Lisa's face burned with shame. She knew she hadn't been the most patient with certain customers, but she never thought it would catch up to her like this. She glanced around the restaurant, noticing how some of the regulars avoided her gaze. Others shook their heads, as if they had seen this behavior before. Mr. Johnson exchanged a glance with his wife, then sighed. "You see, we built this place with the idea that everyone is welcome, no matter who they are." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But tonight, you made us feel like we didn't belong in our own restaurant." Lisa felt a lump in her throat. "I wasn't thinking." "That's the problem," Mrs. Johnson said softly. "You weren't." The air in the restaurant grew heavier as everyone waited. Would Lisa try to defend herself? Would she own up to what she had done? And more importantly, what would the Johnsons do next? Lisa stood there, her fingers twisting the hem of her apron as the silence stretched. She wanted to speak, to explain, to fix the mess she had made, but she could tell it was too late for excuses. Just as she opened her mouth, the restaurant doors swung open, and a tall woman in a sleek navy suit stepped inside. The moment Greg saw her, his face tensed. Lisa noticed too. There was something about this woman's presence that made the whole room straighten up. She walked with purpose, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached their table. "Ah," Mr. Johnson said with a small smile. "Perfect timing." Lisa's stomach flipped. Who was she? The woman extended a hand to Mrs. Johnson first, then turned to Lisa with a measured look. "I'm Vanessa Green," she said smoothly, "Director of Operations for all Johnson-owned restaurants." Lisa's pulse spiked. Director of Operations? That meant she oversaw every single location under the Johnsons brand. Lisa had thought she was just dealing with a wealthy family. She had no idea she was staring down the top executives of a restaurant empire. Vanessa turned to Greg, her voice sharp. "I received the complaint call on my way here." She gestured toward Lisa. "Is this the employee in question?" Lisa's breath caught in her throat. It was no longer just about this one night. This was bigger than she ever imagined. Lisa's chest tightened as Vanessa folded her arms, waiting for an answer. Greg hesitated before giving a small nod. Yes, Lisa was the one handling the Johnsons' table tonight. Vanessa turned to Lisa, her sharp gaze pinning her in place. "Is that true?" she asked. Lisa swallowed hard. She could lie, try to downplay the situation, but what good would that do? They had seen everything. The customers had seen everything. There was no way out of this. "Yes," Lisa admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know who they were." Vanessa arched a brow. "And that's supposed to matter." Lisa felt the weight of those words settle over her. It wasn't just about the Johnsons being wealthy or powerful. It was about the way she had treated them, assuming they weren't worth her time. Mr. Johnson let out a slow breath and pushed his chair back. "We don't run our business like this," he said firmly. "Our restaurants are built on respect, for everyone." Lisa's heart pounded as she braced herself for what was coming next. She had messed up, badly. Any second now, they were going to fire her. But then, just as Vanessa opened her mouth, Mrs. Johnson spoke up. "Hold on," she said gently. "Lisa, have you ever worked in fine dining before?" Lisa blinked, caught off guard. "And no, just a few diners and cafes. This was my first high-end job." Mrs. Johnson nodded, exchanging a glance with her husband. "You were rude. You were unfair. But I also think you've never been trained properly." Lisa's eyes widened. Was this really happening? After everything, they weren't just throwing her out. Vanessa frowned. "You're suggesting we keep her." "Not just keep her," Mrs. Johnson said. "Train her. Teach her what this business is really about." Mr. Johnson studied Lisa for a long moment before finally speaking. "One condition," he said. "You have to prove you can change. This isn't just about keeping your job. It's about learning to treat people with respect, no matter who they are. Lisa's throat tightened as she nodded quickly. I will, I promise. Vanessa sighed but finally relented. Fine, but if I see this behavior again, she's gone. As the tension slowly lifted from the room, Lisa let out a shaky breath. She had walked into her shift thinking she knew everything, but tonight she had learned the most valuable lesson of her life. Lisa felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was mixed with something else, humility. She had been given a second chance, something she knew she didn't deserve, but was willing to work for. Greg let out a breath and clapped his hands together. All right, folks, let's get back to enjoying our evening. The murmurs around the restaurant settled, and the staff returned to their duties. As the Johnsons prepared to leave, Mrs. Johnson paused, giving Lisa a kind but firm look. Growth isn't easy, but it's necessary. We'll be watching. Lisa nodded, her voice steady this time. Thank you. I won't waste this chance. Vanessa gave her one last warning glance before following the Johnsons out the door. As they disappeared into the night, Lisa finally let out the breath she had been holding. That night, as she wiped down tables, she reflected on everything that had happened. She had started the shift feeling like she was in control, but by the end, she had been forced to face her own biases and flaws. This wasn't just a lesson about work, it was a lesson about people, and Lisa was ready to learn.